We've had sort of an infamous murder case down here, which involves 7, 8, and 9 young girls who were hacked up with and butchered, you might say, and it turned out the man found guilty was constantly on drugs.
And the hippies, they're not good for anything. They brought some marijuana in.
Did they give it to your people?
They gave it to some of our boys.
The main problem right now is probably narcotics.
I consider marijuana a harmful drug.
Marijuana is not a drug. It is not a narcotic. It is not addicting as a narcotic is addicting, you see. Narcotics addict and you become hung up on them. There is a lot of research that's done that tends to prove that people who started on marijuana may graduate to more hard drugs later on. Some people control it, just like some people control alcohol.
We used to make busts on beer all the time. That was the big thing on underage drinkers. But now, when marijuana come in, well, then beer became something that really wasn't too much of a problem anymore. We decided that underage drinking wasn't quite as bad as smoking marijuana. And of course, marijuana was nothing near as bad as taking some of the harder narcotics.
The drug situation up here has been, in the past, almost an open market.
Marijuana smoking, pot smoking is very prevalent among all of the young people in this area.
On occasion, we've had narcotics pushed in the area on a very large scale. Usually marijuana or hashish that's sold for profit after dances or in the evenings or back in the employee lounge areas. This is not uncommon to this area.
Marijuana usually is, most marijuana cases are usually juveniles, persons under 18.
Hell yes, they're going to smoke pot. There's tremendous peer pressure. Anything anybody has to sell, it's illegal, immoral, or fattening, they'll do it and love it.
I feel that most of our drugs are coming from Mexico, probably. Coming across the Mexican border and then being brought up here by probably the long hair element or even other people.
I understand that Lake Meadow is one of the dropping points for narcotics.
If I were a drug user, I can think of probably no better place than to go back up over the dunes and get in one of the back beach areas. Where you can be relatively safe that there's not going to be somebody coming over the dunes after you. There are so many places within the seashore, and I imagine within any national park, where they're relatively free from prying eyes.
I know there's drugs here, and I know that there's people taking them, but I myself haven't just personally run into a lot of cases.
They don't smoke it openly, naturally. In my view, for being a uniformed man, they wouldn't do that. But I know it's here, you know.
The marijuana scene is not controlled, I don't believe, by any one organization, as the hard drugs may be. The importation of it into the country, I think, is done far more on a larger scale than it's ever been. People who never would have engaged in it before are engaging in it now.
It's no longer fashionable to sell or use drugs as much as it was. It's still prevalent, it's still a serious problem, but it isn't the end thing. You don't have to now and still belong to a peer group.
We find a lot of teenagers smoking marijuana. There are some cases of heroin addicts using the park too to sell into also as users.
Boulder Beach is having sometimes as high as 7 narcotics busts a week, and we aren't having any. We've come close to some that we're fairly certain of. What we're trying to determine now is whether we are being spared this or whether or not we're not covering the area thoroughly enough to see it.
With the recent training that we had, the drug training school at Ozark this past winter, it made us realize that that we had a much greater drug problem here than we were aware of, simply because we had not had the training prior to that course to be alert to what to look for.
The only way the government or the rangers can react to this situation is by providing law enforcement and protection for the people, actually kind of to provide protection against themselves.
I never seen anybody on marijuana that bad. LSD, maybe.
Sometimes from the underground newspapers you get articles written which feature LSD as a means of increasing your appreciation for Grand Canyon, especially from the psychedelic effect, whatever excitement they get from viewing Grand Canyon through LSD, sometimes work to their disadvantage because they'll fall off the trail or wherever they're at when they're under the influence of LSD, so the trip isn't really worthwhile.
Most of the people we catch that have been busting in cars, we find out that most of them are heroin addicts, and they are using this car busting as a source of getting revenue to buy heroin. After talking to him, he will state that he had $75 to $80 a day habit, which means he has to steal about $400 or $500 worth of property and sell it at a discount price to get his $75.
My kids are better schooled in drugs than I am. My fifth grader can give you the list of pills that she can buy.
One way of looking at it is that the parks don't differentiate between hard drugs and marijuana, and the kids do, because the kids who have gone through most of this realize there's a big difference. And they realize that people behave differently. A person on marijuana is very passive, and he's going to sit around and just enjoy life generally. A person who is dropping amphetamine pills and if he's drinking wine at the same time, it's really going to be ripping out, and he's really going to be aggressive. And even the kids acknowledge that in that kind of situation, they don't want any part of other people who are doing that. As a matter of fact, you know, a couple of guys freaks in Yosemite said, "Man, we don't want any of that." And they referred to those people, the people dropping reds, as the fuck-offs, the people who they wanted protection from too. But as far as marijuana, they see it as just a mild experience, and so they get a bit disillusioned when the park police, the park rangers, the administration, puts everything in the same category. And so you get right back to this old labeling thing. Oh, those goddamn pigs, they just see us all as dope fiends when we're not doing anything worse than what they are drinking.
Marijuana isn't what you call a big deal. No, not to us. At one time it was, but now it's not, because it's commonplace. And I haven't found that any cases of where a person that was under marijuana was tripped out or out of his head, or would say was more violent, something than maybe he would normally be. He might be high, but I've never seen any cases where he was actually, you can say, tripped out of his head.
You know, there are laws which say you can't do this. But these are the kind of laws which relate to a person and a person's treatment of himself. The kid puffing grass is doing no harm to anyone other than himself. And I'm not sure that it's our role to send rangers out into the underbrush and peering for kids who are puffing grass.
No, it doesn't bother me, no.
I have seen in a campground where kids will take a bottle of wine, pass it around, and drop all sorts of pills into it, shake it up, and then they'll pass the bottle around, and everybody takes a drink out of it. You know, well, there's no telling, you know, what kind of a dynamite you've got in this bottle when you see this thing go on. We've had treatment in our park hospitals of kids who are in drug-induced comas. So it's something with which, you know, we've got to have a genuine concern. If the individual isn't concerned for his own welfare, you say, well, maybe we shouldn't be, but we're not in a position where we can say we shouldn't be. We've got to be concerned about his welfare regardless of whether he's concerned about it or not. We're obligated to be.
I don't think it's realistic to assume that they're going to stop using, at least the youth are going to stop using narcotics in the park any more than they do in the city, or that we should be any more uptight about them using narcotics. We shouldn't turn our back to it, but we shouldn't be solely occupied with that function where we're overlooking everything else. This business about grass, I suspect the police in a metropolitan area are becoming much more blasé about the way they enforce the laws dealing with marijuana than we are in the park. We think it's a cardinal sin out here, and yet in the city, why, they recognize that this kind of thing we aren't going to overcome overnight, The adult culture has been talking about the terrible sins of narcotics, or particularly marijuana, for many years. And the kids have found out through use that it isn't quite as bad as the adults had been telling them for years. So,
well, I think that the dope scene is pretty much exaggerated as far as its importance in relation to our law enforcement activities here. I don't think we suffer from a large dope problem, and I don't think that we should spend a great many man-hours on trying to solve the problem, because it really doesn't exist. I mean, I'd rather have a few kids blowing grass in the park than drinking a batch of beer and driving their cars, because drinking beer in cars has always led to tragedy in the park, and dope hasn't.
The most inherent danger to the welfare of the community is not represented by the single person who occasionally smokes marijuana, but by the members of organized crime and the so-called pushers who start a youngster off smoking marijuana and encourage him to escalate to hard drugs such as opium, otherwise called smack. And in that event, the danger is not, as I said, merely smoking marijuana, but the danger is in those who are distributing marijuana with the intent to addict the person on heroin or other hard drugs. And that's the vicious cycle that is the most dangerous one in the country. Many informed biologists and medical research experts have come to the conclusion that smoking marijuana is no less harmful, and probably less harmful, than drinking alcoholic beverages.
Personally, it doesn't really bother me at all. Not to take this out of context, that I think it's perfectly all right and a good idea for these young kids to blow their minds on marijuana. But that to the extent that if there's no problem of a crime against persons or property, if they're smoking marijuana the same way that kids 18 or 21 drink beer, well, I don't see that problem. And if they aren't driving under the influence of any intoxicating liquor or drugs.
I would say a person using marijuana and a person using alcoholic beverages would is very close. Both highs are very close. The only way I would be able to recognize the difference is to smell the alcohol on one. Actually, the end results is almost the same.
I imagine that some of the young people we've dealt with in the park that have been on beer have been much more of a problem than those kids that have been on grass.
I would say that it's open to debate. I mean, personally, I think it's much too soon to say, well, legalize it, you know. Because really, I don't think there's been enough research and enough actually finding out if it does cause problems. Maybe 20 years later, we might come down with something similar to what cigarette industry is going through now.
I personally believe it should be, until such time as they can find that it is injurious. I think that the government should allow it. I think that before these things get on them, where they miss the boat is they don't test these things before they do become widespread. They've known that marijuana has been smoked for a length of time, and yet they've never really put any great effort into researching to find out whether or not it is harmful. I think they should have started a long time ago. They always seem to be a little late.
I wouldn't want to see it legalized, at least not right now, till more medical proof can come about that there's no harm.
In making comments, I admit I'm very biased. I said I was on the Eisenhower Violence Commission, and the report I co-authored was the first governmental staff study ever to come out for legalized pot, and which got a lot of bad flack by many people. And this we did on the basis of the best evidence at hand and all the best scholars who were doing research for us.
I wouldn't go so far as to endorse a movement to legalize marijuana. I believe the record is clear that in Europe and in Asia, in countries where there is a long history and tradition of the use of marijuana and these other derivatives similar to marijuana, that they have yet to legalize this use.
Like I shouldn't come out and say that I think pot should be legalized or anything like that, right?
Many have asked the question as to whether or not marijuana should be legalized. The president asked a commission to investigate the problem. He responded to it by saying that he was not in favor of legalizing marijuana. There is definitely merit and great wisdom behind the president's conclusion. But viewed from another perspective, if we are to make a dent in this area of over-criminalization, that is, crimes that many feel are not crimes, after all, alcohol consumption, drinking, sale of alcohol at one time was considered unlawful. There was a period of prohibition, but the people went on drinking, and again, it was legalized. As times changed, attitudes changed. There is a good argument to be made, however, for looking at many of these laws, which are misdemeanors and not felonies, which, in the view of many, represent behavior which should involve the individual choice of the person who decides whether or not he wants to smoke marijuana, whether or not he wants to drink alcohol, whether or not he wants to gamble, whether or not he wants to have an affair with a woman before he marries her. In such cases as this, there is reasonable room for reform.
I don't think it should be legalized. Yet, on the other hand, I'm also opposed to some of the very severe penalties that are attached to marijuana.
I think the marijuana laws in the various states that are on the books should be not removed, but the penalties changed and made less than what they are.
But the laws in some areas that deal with the dispossession are much too strong, I think.
Tend to think that they need a lot of serious thought given to them. Possibly now they are overly stringent. Probably they should be reviewed closely with an eye to change. As far as having any real personal axe to grind, I don't. I tend to think it's somewhat akin to prohibition, and to a certain extent it's an individual decision, yet it is a law, and we're paid to enforce the law reasonably and intelligently.
Well, the recent law passed in D.C., I think, is a just law because it gives the pusher guaranteed a certain length of time where a user can be put on probation or can be sent to a hospital.
In Texas, you can get life imprisonment for the use of marijuana.
The severity of the penalty should match the severity of the crime. And in my opinion, I believe it's fair right now, penalty versus the crime. I can't tell you exactly the fine, but it's 1 year for possession, first offense.
Most of the court cases that are brought before the district court here end in suspended sentences and probation. I can't recall anybody being sent to jail for being present where marijuana has been found or for using.
As far as the user or the person that just has a small amount on him is concerned, they probably should get, well, they usually do get a suspended sentence now, actually, which I think is fine. But anytime you got somebody pushing, I think he ought to get a sentence which is to the limit of the law, shall we say.
I think the laws dealing with narcotics traffic should probably be something that's nationwide, so it is the same everywhere, rather than one state having a penalty, a mandatory penalty of 5 to 10 years if you're even caught in the same room with somebody that has marijuana, where other states, like I just quoted, Massachusetts, the offender will be put on probation and suspended sentence.
I think that the young people, which are the primary users of this drug, are probably ahead of many of the older people in the country that are the ones that have put these laws on the books.
Well, I know out here I can't enforce marijuana, the marijuana law, the Dangerous Drug Act, simply because it's just so widespread. I'd be arresting just about everybody down here. So if I see somebody using marijuana, I'll just try and confiscate it and kick them out. But to go as far as an arrest in a situation like Supai is just impossible.
On several of the cases we have actually been in with the group and asked them for a draw for the marijuana cigarette they were smoking, and they hand it to you, and then you place them under arrest.
We have some marijuana, narcotics. We have a few areas where the kids like to go, and we go looking for them.
We don't really have any narcotic squad, and we don't just go out looking for drug violators. If we come across them in a regular patrol or as a result of other investigations, then we will take action.
The use of marijuana in the national parks, this is a thing separate and apart, I believe, from the use of drugs and narcotics. Totally another ball game, you know. We're not entirely free agents. I say we, I'm referring to park rangers and the service as a whole. We're not entirely free agents. There are some parks where the use of marijuana is so widespread and so in public view that the superintendent receives complaints daily about it. And he's called to account for the fact that this is occurring within his park and that he has a responsibility to act, you know, to suppress it. And, you know, this is a very real pressure. It gets communicated to us through channels over on the Hill. So we're not free agents, and, you know, here again, you have to understand the situation in which you're working at the given time. When I say beating the underbrush, I mean literally that. There is no point for us to send rangers out into the backcountry and along backcountry trails into remote areas of the park looking for people smoking marijuana. They just got no need to do this. As complaints about the use of marijuana are received, then we jolly well have to do something. This is the kind of distinction that I wanted to draw. Then the other thing is that in the traffic of drugs and narcotics, the pills and that kind of thing, there is a known record of this kind of traffic existing in some of our parks because it's quite understood in some urban sections that there are some national parks where that's where the action is. And they can go and buy this kind of material quite freely in these parks. This kind of traffic, it seems to me, we have to be aware of and take steps to overcome it. There is a Bureau of Government, the Bureau of Narcotics, which is established solely to engage in this kind of activity. And I would like to see the Bureau of Narcotics take a more active role in this thing in the parks than we have had to do to this point. I've had experience with this in the field and dealing with the Bureau, and largely they have said, you know, we're not interested because your problem really doesn't amount to much. So we've been forced to rely upon our own resources.
Okay, if I was put in charge of handling the drugs in Yosemite, I would put a number of undercover men who could live in the park with the people in the park, and I would try to cut it off as the source of the supplier instead of the users.
In San Francisco, there's a suicide center in which people on the phone who get calls from people committing suicides are very, very acutely aware of what drugs are being, what drugs the person on the calling them have taken. And they can respond in different ways because they know someone on amphetamines is going to be very jumpy. Someone on barbiturates is going to go in the opposite direction. There's absolutely no sensitivity by the person in the field in the parks as to what kind of drugs a person may be taking. And of course, in terms of legal responses, there is no sensitivity either. They're just bad. And I think until there's a greater differentiation between soft and hard drugs, you're really going to have a big problem.
Some people tend to have a more adverse reaction to a given situation than others. You know, some people especially in the field of marijuana, some guys really have a big hang-up on it. You know, by God, you know, this is one thing that we can't tolerate to any degree. Well, others look at it and say, well, you know, as long as it doesn't create another problem for me, you know, I'm not going to concern myself with it because I've got bigger fish to fry. You know, I've got other problems that I deem to be more important than just going out here and locking some kid up for smoking pot. So you've got to analyze the situation. You've got to really look at what your real problems are, and you've got to direct your most effort to your most genuine problems. And it could well be that marijuana is the most genuine problem you have. On the other hand, it may not be.